Hello. So, our next presenter is Stan Collins, who is a nationally known suicide prevention specialist who has spent the last 14 years educating more than 500,000 adults and youth about how they can help prevent suicide. In 2001, he testified before a U.S. Senate subcommittee on the topic of youth suicide. He currently works as a consultant to numerous organizations in the field, focusing on technical assistance in creation and implementation of suicide prevention curricula and strategies. Please help me in welcoming up Stan Collins.
All right. Hey, everybody. Lane, can you hear me okay? All right. Can somebody hear me? Emma, it's nodding. You guys can hear me all right? Cool. Awesome. So my name is Stan Collins. I've been doing a lot of work around the state. You kind of heard about the work I've been doing. I've spent the last 20 years working in suicide prevention. I'm actually coming to you from a hotel room in Florida because I'm at the American Association of Suicidology conference where I'll be speaking tomorrow. So really excited to step away from that to be here with you all. And, as I was asked to kind of prepare remarks, one of the things I was asked to speak to is, helping create momentum and helping you to become, prepared to be advocates for change. And I thought there's really no better place to start that conversation than to tell you the story of why I do this work. So I mentioned I've been doing this for 20 years. So my entire adult life has been dedicated to suicide prevention. And a lot of that's been in the school setting, but I also work with first responders. I work with military, medical providers, behavioral health providers. But my resume really isn't what matters to you guys. What I want to talk about is why I do this work. So growing up, I had a good friend of mine, and his name is Jesse. And I had met Jesse because my older brother and his older brother were best friends. And so whenever our older brothers, since they could drive, would go to the beach or go to the movies or whatever, me and Jesse were thrown in the back seat, and we were told to, tag along and go with them. And so I kind of refer to it jokingly as an arranged friendship, like this forced friendship that we were put in the space to share this time with. And we would go to the beach or movies, whatever. And Jesse was actually a year older than me. So whenever, we hung out, we were just different. He was kind of a cool guy, ran with the tough crowd. Going into my freshman year in high school, I was a self-proclaimed nerd long before being a nerd was kind of cool. I was going to Comic-Con way before Comic-Con was cool. And kind of small for my age, whatever. But eventually over time, Jesse took me under his wing and he looked out for me. And I was really lucky because my freshman year in high school, I ended up in the same fourth period geometry class as Jesse. So every day I knew that I could go to that class. We'd go to lunch. There'd be a couple more classes and the day would pretty much be over. But one night I was coming down the hallway of my house and my older brother was coming towards me. And as he got close, I realized that he had tears in his eyes. And me and my brother are very different on the emotional spectrum. My brother is a cop and he kind of, stuffs his emotions down, whereas I wear my emotions on my sleeve. I cry at Disney movies and when I read Hallmark cards at the holidays or whatever. So for me to see my brother with tears in his eyes, I knew something bad had happened. Even at that age, I knew that whatever my brother was about to tell me was going to change my life. I could just feel it. And my brother went on to tell me that Jesse had died by suicide that afternoon. And just the weight of the world hit me when I heard those words. And I remember stumbling back until I hit the wall and sliding down, putting my head between my knees and just crying for hours. Just being overwhelmed with so many emotions. And for those of you who have lost somebody to suicide, you know that it's anger, it's frustration, it's sadness, it's guilt, it's shame. I mean, I had just seen Jesse a few hours before in geometry class. If I was such a good friend, how could I not have seen that he was this close? How could I not have seen all the pain that he was experiencing? And eventually I made my way to bed and was getting up the next morning, walking onto campus and, just not sure what to be prepared for, not sure why I was even there. And it wasn't until I walked in that fourth period geometry class, and it was in one of those like temporary trailers that they set up for classrooms, and you walk up and the ramp is real loud or whatever. And I remember as I went to open the door that every ounce of my being wanted to believe that when I opened that door, Jesse was going to be sitting there. And instead what happened is that day and every day for the rest of the school year, I sat next to my best friend's empty desk. And every day for 50 minutes, I sat there and wondered what I could have done, what I could have said, what if I would have stopped by that afternoon, what if I would have talked to him after class, what if I would have created space in our friendship to have conversations or more, in-depth emotional conversations, and just being overwhelmed. Now, this was, 20 plus years ago, and this was at a time when we didn't have anything like this when I was in high school. I mean, we even after Jesse died, we didn't even have conversations in the school. We were just told to keep silent, to not talk about it, and we swept it under the rug and we hid it in the closet, which made everything worse. Because now not only am I dealing with the death of one of my best friends, I'm dealing with the death of one of my best friends without any avenues for support, not knowing who to talk about or how to talk about it or where to go. And unfortunately, that's where that part of the story ends, because I just had to deal with that in silence. Now, fast forward to my senior year in high school. Um, my father is also a cop, and he had wanted me to come to a presentation from the Yellow Ribbon Suicide Prevention Program. And he asked me, as a youth who was in peer counseling and who had lost a friend to suicide, will you come down and check out this organization, and just thumbs up, thumbs down, should we endorse this program? And to be honest with you guys, I was biased, because just by the title of the program, it was the first time in my life. I was 17 years old. I'd already lost a friend to suicide. And for the first time in my life, I heard someone attach the word prevention to the word suicide. And so I was jazzed, and I went, checked out the presentation, and walked away feeling really empowered. And honestly, I remember thinking, like, adults in my life have talked to me about all the different ways that youth can die, and yet no one ever talked to me about the one way that my friend had died. Like, we got to talk about this. And so I went back to my principal the next day and gave him a packet of information. And I said, hey, we gotta do this program. And he kind of rolled his eyes and he said, well, let me look through this stuff and I'll come back to you in a few days. And so I came back a couple days later and I said, hey, have you had a chance to check out that stuff? And he's like, I got really busy. I'm a principal. I had a lot going on. Why don't you come back in a few more days? And I said, okay, I'll come back. I came back and got the same response. Hey, I haven't had a chance to look at it. Come back in a few more days. And so I came back a few days later. And we ended up doing this dance for weeks and then months, until finally one day I walk in his office, and it's either the right time or the wrong time. But for whatever reason, he just looked at me. He's like, look, you're not going to give this up. You're a good kid. If you think this is something that we should do, then let's do it. And so we set it up. He said, you go raise the money, you work with the folks on the program, and we'll make it happen. So a few months later, there we are. We had gathered all the students into the gymnasium to have this conversation about suicide prevention. The founders of the program are there, Dale and Dar Emmy. They had lost their son to suicide, which is why they created the program. And everybody is there, and they're about to start the presentation. And literally like 10 minutes before they're about to start talking, they look at me and they say, hey, Stan, have you thought about what you're going to say? And I was like, wait, what? Like, no. I got the people here. You guys are here. I raised the money. Like, this is your show. And they're like, no. We think that your classmates, we think you have something to say that your classmates would benefit from. And so I was freaking out, and I dug in my backpack, and I ended up remembering that I had written a poem in memory of my friend Jesse. It's called "I'm Still Here Because You Were There." Now in the poem, it's a similar story, except that it ends differently. Where the friend sees the signs, some of the things that Matt talked about just now, and was willing to engage and have a conversation to help that friend find their reasons for living. And so I dig it out of my backpack, and I'm like, for whatever reason, I think that that's a good idea. And so here I am, my senior year. I'm standing literally in front of my entire school, 3,000 students, every teacher, every student is packed into the gym. And I'm not only talking about one of the most uncomfortable subjects out there, mental health and suicide prevention, but I'm reading poetry. I'm reading a poem to my school, and I am just mortified. I'm so embarrassed, thinking like, man, you are so dumb and naive to think that you could ever make a difference. So I read the poem and I say something else I don't even remember. But after we were done, I was so mortified. I skipped practice that day. I went home, I went to bed, I pulled the sheets over my head and wanted to pretend like this day had just never existed. And the next day I was getting ready for school, and by my senior year, I was pretty connected or whatever, but I still felt like I was preparing for battle when I was going to school that day. I was like, I don't know how people are going to react, respond. And I was walking onto campus, and the attendance lady had a window that faced the front of the school, so she could see everybody as they're coming and going. And as I was walking onto campus, she made eye contact with me, and she immediately turned around, walked out of the building, and I see her, and she's literally, heat seeking me out from across the campus. And I was a good, pretty good kid, stayed out of trouble, but I'm freaking out because the attendance lady, who I've never really spoken to, is now like hunting me down from across school. And so I'm freaking out, and then I realize as she gets close to me that she's got like a kind smile on her face. And I also realized that she had an envelope in her hand. And as she comes up to me, she says, and I'll never forget these words because they have impacted the last 20 years of my life, is that she said to me, I have a gift for you. And I open up the envelope, and it's a letter from a girl named Sarah. Now, Sarah didn't give me her last name or her last initials, so to this day, I'm still searching for Sarah. But Sarah went on to tell me in this letter that she had been thinking about suicide. And that yesterday, when she showed up for that presentation and heard me talk about it, it was the first time that she had ever heard someone else talk about the S word or talk about suicide. And that it made her reflect on so many things. And it was the strangest thing because she thanked me for my pain, which I just never, up until that point, I never understood it that way. But she said, thank you for your pain, because she was in so much emotional pain that she had convinced herself that people would be better off without her. She had convinced herself that she was a burden in people's lives. And she said, when I shared my pain about my friend Jesse, that it had made her take a step back and realize the impact that her suicide would have on other people in her lives. She also thanked me for sharing my hope, because the hope that I shared was that one of the things that we don't acknowledge enough, especially as youth, is that your ability to have empathy for other people is unmatched. And so she shared that, just thanking me for my hope that other people would be there, that I would be willing to be there for her. And she went on to tell me that poem that I was so embarrassed to read in front of my entire school, she had actually gone to the teacher, and the teacher had made copies for her, and that she had spread them around campus, and that she'd shared it with all her friends. And she told me that she put the poem next to her bed and was going to read it every single morning to help her find her reasons for living. And she basically went on to say, thank you for helping to save my life. And I share this story with you, and I share this story often because suicide, mental health can seem overwhelming for us to have an impact. But as a 17-year-old student with no training in mental health, no training in suicide prevention, simply because I was willing to create space to have conversations about it, I was able to help someone find their reasons for living. And so I share this with you in the hopes that you never underestimate the role that you can have in helping someone to be here tomorrow, to make a different decision, and to find their reasons for living. Sometimes all it is about creating space and having a conversation. It's not about fixing a problem. It's about sitting with somebody in the mud until they figure it out, or to help them find the way. See, when I try to simplify suicide down to its two most basic factors, it comes down to pain and hope. And suicide happens when that pain outweighs that hope. Now, we can't prevent pain from entering our lives or entering people that we care about and into their lives. But what we can do is help people hold on to that hope. Because I've been there too. During the same time period, I was a senior in high school who had a lot of things going on. But I was also struggling internally because my parents were going through a separation and a divorce. And so even though I was on the water polo team and, I was in a relationship and in one biggest flirt in the yearbook, I was able to put the mask on to play the game. And yet inside I was torn apart. And so I wasn't even listening to my own recommendations that it's okay to not be okay. And that caused me to do a lot of things that looking back, I wish I could have done differently. And one of the biggest strengths that I found is being able to reach out for help and letting people know that you just need someone to hold on to that hope for you. Now, when it comes to suicide prevention, I used to believe that suicide was about trying to convince people not to die. And what I've come to understand is that suicide is about helping people find their reasons for living. Because suicide's not about wanting to die, it's about not knowing how to go on living. And you as youth, one thing that I want to share with you all today is looking back, you heard about, I just told you about how I started this program in my school. One of the things I am most proud of in my life is that program is still there. In the 20 years since I graduated, that program has literally reached, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of youth. You also heard that when I was young, I got to testify before the United States Senate in the creation of the National Strategy for Suicide Prevention. These are all, accomplishments that I look back and never would have happened without that letter. But the one thing that I didn't realize at the time, even while I was doing all these things, is that there's something that our society does to you as youth that I didn't realize at the time, but we try to minimize the power of your voice because maybe you can't vote, maybe you can't drive, maybe you can't whatever because of your age. We the society tries to tell you that therefore you don't have power. And the one thing I really hope you start to begin to understand is that right now you have more power to your voice than you will ever have. And so if something is not right, do not sit down and be quiet. If you are worried about a friend, don't make sure that you're connecting them to somebody who can help and a trusted adult, but don't dismiss the value that you have in that individual's life. We, I think, over the past year have seen more than ever that nothing, the phrase, nothing about us without us. And you as youth need to make sure that any programs out there for mental health that your schools or your communities are bringing in, that you guys have a part of that. So with that, there's one other thing, and thanks to all you guys who are sending messages. I just looked over the chat. That's really sweet. I appreciate it. One thing that I want to also share with you guys today is just how we talk about these subjects is really important. How we message about suicide is hugely important. And so I want to just correct some of the terminology that you might have heard around the topic. When someone has died by suicide, oftentimes we will say that that person committed suicide. But if you play a word association game with me, what are some of the other actions that we commit? So fill in the blank. We commit blank. We commit blank. We commit crime. We commit sin. We commit treason or adultery. All these negative things. And so that then makes that term committed and the issue of suicide associated with crime and sin. It used to be illegal to attempt suicide. A lot of faith institutions are starting to change the way that they frame suicide because they realize that by classifying suicide as a sin or the equivalent of a sin, it was only preventing people, it wasn't preventing suicide, it was preventing people from talking about it. So instead of using the term committed, it's recommended to use the term died by suicide or died of suicide. So I think looking at terminology is important because when we have the words, it helps us to have the conversations. And the one thing that I have learned when it comes to suicide is I have a saying that goes, when you speak the name of the beast, it will retreat. Only by talking openly about suicide can we ever hope to prevent it. And I want you to never be afraid to ask the question, are you thinking about suicide? And if someone says yes, the response should, can be anything. It can be, I'm so sorry, I had no idea you were in so much pain. What can I do to help? Who can we talk to about this? But one thing I really want to encourage you is that you got to tell a trusted adult, whoever that is that you trust or who they trust, because we know that 60 to 80% of youth will tell a friend, but less than a quarter of those friends will go on to tell an adult. And what that ends up doing is it prevents that person from a lot of times from getting the help that they need. So with that, I'm not sure who's in charge anymore, or if I'm overrunning my time. I think I'm right about out of time. I'm looking for the moderator to tell me yes or no, or.
Hi, Stan. It's Danelle. Did you need a
Hey,
couple?
Danelle, I'm sorry.
Good. Do you need a couple more minutes?
Yeah, I just wanted to share a film from Pleasant Valley High School that they submitted to a program I do, Directing Change. Can I have 2 more minutes to do that?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
All right, great. I'm going to pull that up 1 second. So any Pleasant Valley folks out there, stoked to have you here. Danelle, can you just give me a quick thumbs up if that's showing up on for you, our battle? All right, great.
Hello, my name is Marco Lopez, and I am a normal everyday high schooler, except I've been struggling with suicidal thoughts. It's hard. Sometimes I feel like I'm fighting alone. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. If you look close enough, many of us are going through the same battle. So whenever you're feeling alone, don't forget that many of us are soldiers fighting the same war, and we've got your back.
Many teenagers are having thoughts of suicide. If you see the warning signs, such as changes in sleep, isolating oneself, or feelings of hopelessness, don't be afraid to seek help. Or, if you see these signs in a friend, help them. One day, we can end this war, together. If you or a loved one is feeling suicidal, call the National Suicide Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255. 8255.
The last thing I want to leave you with is that number that hopefully you're going to hear or see throughout the day. It also should be on your student IDs, but the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. One thing I want to emphasize to you before I go is that a lot of times we think there is a threshold of emergency. Like when you call 911, you know that it should be an emergency, right? With the National Lifeline, that's not how it works. You can, of course, be the person in crisis, but there does not have to be a level of distress that you have to reach before reaching out. If you're worried about a friend, some of you put some notes out there that said you're worried about somebody, you can contact the Lifeline and say, hey, I'm worried about a friend. This is what's going on. What do I do? If after today is done, some emotions have risen to the surface for you and you just need to talk to somebody, it has nothing to do with suicide. You just have some emotions you're trying to figure out. You can call them. If a friend or a family member, if one of your parents comes to you and says that they're having thoughts of suicide, you can contact them and say, hey, where do I go? What do I do? If a friend you're worried about and for whatever reason, social distancing or whatever, you can't go physically see them, you can do a 3-way call with them and say, hey, I'm going to call you and then let's call the Lifeline together. And so whether that's the crisis text line, the National Lifeline, any of those crisis resources, you do not have to be the person in crisis. You do not have to be in crisis to reach out. So with that, if any of you out there are struggling right now, instead of trying to find things to convince you not to die, I hope that you will search for reasons for living. If you can't find those reasons, I hope that you will reach out and talk about this. Having thoughts of suicide is nothing to be ashamed of. It is just sometimes part of the human experience. 1 in 5 youth in any given year are going to think about it. So it's not abnormal to have those thoughts. It's actually really common if that's what you're dealing with. And a lot of times we worry about talking about it because we're worried that if we admit that we have that, we feel like we're going to be this fragile piece of glass for the rest of our lives. And that's absolutely not the truth. 90% of people who attempt suicide will not go on to die by suicide. 70% will not go on to attempt again. And there's something called post-traumatic growth. So whatever struggles you may be going through right now, know that it is only going to make you stronger and more resilient for the things to come in your life. So with that, I'm going to let y'all go, but thank you so much for having me today. It's nice to see you all, and I really am honored to be in your presence today.